I had a run-in on Twitter a couple of weeks ago, maybe a month ago. The British Medical Journal, BMJ,
right?
They're putting together a series, and it's about what we learned from COVID, right?
Right. Lessons learned.
And lessons learned. And so I just casually caught this. Like, I wasn't looking, I wasn't doing a deep dive or an investigative look. I just noticed this, that one of the guys who was tweeting about how he was appointed as an editor for this project, this series, sponsored and published by the British Medical Journal, BMJ, was one of the guys who used to call people like me and you a conspiracy theorist because we said that the virus came from the Wuhan lab. Yeah. And I said, so this is the guy that the British Medical Journal is, has he apologized for calling other scientists conspiracy theorists yet? And of course he didn't. He doubled down. But worse than that, the editor of the British Medical Journal then tweeted that Jimmy Dore is a conspiracy theorist. And he said there's a lot of problems with medical journals, but being bought by Big Pharma isn't one of them. Because that's what I said. I go, these guys are just bought by Big Pharma, and they'll lie and tell you anything. And now the people who are lying at the behest of Big Pharma are now being put in as editors on what we...
So the reason why he was able to ding you is because you used words that are fundamentally true. You spoke truth as you understand it, but you didn't use the right words, Jimmy. Because Pharma is very clever. They don't own the journals. The journals are owned by extremely large transnational corporations that belong to the WEF, that are controlled by the usual investment arms, BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard, etc. And as right at the beginning of this, Brett Weinstein and Steve Kirsch and myself, as you may recall, sat down and had a chat. And it destroyed all three of our careers in many ways, but we knew that was going to happen going in, and we still did it. One of the things that Brett said, if you go back to that, is he speculated that what's going on here is that we think of these corporations, including media, as separate financial entities, as separate corporate entities, but they aren't. They're all owned and controlled by these very large investment funds, transnational investment funds, and they all function not as separate corporations, but as separate divisions of one corporation. And so you end up with the big publishers controlled by the same money interests, part of these same consortiums, and they act consistent with the interests of their little cabal, corporate cabal. And it's not that Pharma owns the journals, although, as Bobby has pointed out, Pharma has a bunch of nefarious tricks up their sleeve, like they'll buy large numbers of copies of a given edition of a journal if it has a favorable paper. Okay, so if you're the editor, it's wink wink nod nod, publish a favorable article, and your revenue sheet will suddenly improve. And so what's happening, and we talked about it at the very beginning of this segment before you switched over, we talked about corporatism. And we talked about its true name, fascism, or public-private partnerships is the nice euphemism they like to use. And that's what's going on, is we're seeing the evidence, the breadcrumbs, the little droppings that are left, that the likes of you and I perceive from time to time because we're busy looking. And then we say, oh, look, we found another little fragment that proves the core thesis, and we get attacked because, oh no, that can't possibly be true. That must be a conspiracy theory. But in fact, it is absolutely what's going on, is that this has all become integrated into globalist structures, and these are not independent corporations. The hospitals are not independent. The insurance companies are not independent. They're all dependent on capital. And capital, right? I like to say, this is the new golden rule. those with the gold make the rules. And
Sounds like the old one too.
Yeah.
That's what's really going on behind the scenes in all this. It's not that necessarily pharma owns the journals. It's that pharma is owned by the same people that own the journals.
Also, we pointed out that they actually take direct advertising from pharmaceutical companies.
In many cases, that's true.
The British Medical Journal certainly does, and they tried to bury that information, but we found it. It wasn't hard to find. And so they're not only taking advertising from big pharma, but they're also owned by the same companies that own the pharma.
And they do this little trick of having very large numbers of copies, paper copies, and they're at high prices that are purchased by pharma when they have some favorable article. And then pharma can take it into the doctor's offices and pass it out. And it's all wink, wink, nod, nod on the square. It's all okay. Because then pharma's not advertising directly to the doctor. They're just giving the doctor the latest edition of the New England Journal of Medicine.
of the British Medical Journal. They're just giving you, hey, look, this is a third party. We don't have anything to do with it except that we just gave them $50 million but when we bought all these paper editions of their thing that nobody else would read.
Hey, that's the trick that Scientology used with L. Ron Hubbard's books, where they'd buy a huge amount and he's on the bestseller list.
Oh yeah.
It's all the same trick.
That's common in publishing industry. That's another industry that's just gone to hell in a handbasket.
All of them, they're all the goddamn same. If fly by night like supplement companies pull this shit, what do you think really rich companies do that are transnational? You don't think they do it much better on a much larger scale?
So,
well, the other thing that they have going for them is when you get to a certain size, regulatory burden becomes your friend.
Right.
Because it excludes your competition. Yeah. And you're the one, you got to be of a certain size to be able to tolerate and sustain all the stuff that the gubbies throw at you.
Like, can you give me a for instance?
It's classic in what happens at the FDA. In the case of pharmaceutical industry. Well, here's a great example. You mentioned a moment ago the supplements industry. The supplements industry came to fore because there was a law passed, I think, in 95 that empowered supplements and basically forced them to be treated as food. And since then, in the United States, the supplements industry has exploded. Pharma doesn't like that very much because there are things going on in nutraceuticals that are threatening the pharma's new growth sector, which is biopharmaceuticals. Because there's a fine line between an engineered plant that's making a protein and a purified recombinant protein that's made in, say, bacteria or yeast. Okay? So from pharma's standpoint, the nutraceutical industry is a growing threat to their market shares and their growth opportunities. They want to have more control. And so what pharma's doing is they're oh so gently suggesting to Congress through their various lobbyists that there just needs to be more regulation, that this nutraceutical industry is out of control now. They really need to have more oversight to ensure the purity and potency of their products. And basically, they're trying to force them into a pharmaceutical industry model in which they'll have to do clinical trials, they'll have to have drug dossiers on their products, and then most of these little players that produce these nutraceuticals can't afford the 10 million to 100 million to billions of dollars necessary to support all of this documentation. And so suddenly they go out of business and Big Pharma's there to lap them up. Because Big Pharma has the pockets. They have the deep pockets and the infrastructure necessary to run the clinical trials, to run the regulatory dossiers and support that and those submissions, maintain them, etc. So for them, basically regulations becomes a backdoor to monopolistic practices. which is what the folks like Javier Milei are all hot on, the anarcho-capitalists that Milei has said repeatedly, he said it again at CPAC. There are no monopolies unless the government gets involved. Monopoly, as we see it, is either a good thing when it occurs because a corporation is producing goods and services that are superior to its competitors. And it's a bad thing when the government intervenes and creates structures, rules, and regulations that enable monopolistic practices and enable monopolistic corporations to thrive at the expense of consumers by being the ones that are able to provide the necessary documentation and compliance. I saw this in the biodefense industry, in the military industrial complex, when I used to do contracting and contract oversight there. Well, what I saw again and again was companies that were able to support all the compliance requirements were the ones that would win the big contracts, not the companies that had the best tech, the companies that were best able to comply with the government's requirements and regulations. That's how this game works. And that's how it's evolved right now. So you asked for some examples. I've given you two, one from the military industrial and one from nutraceuticals and pharma.
Remember we covered about the new electric leaf blowers. You can't have a gas-powered leaf blower. It's going to run all the landscapes out of business, but you'll be able to get Amazon's home leaf blowing service because they'll be compliant. That's a big example.
Yeah.
Great. Perfect example.
Hey, come see us do a live stand-up show. We're going to be in Stockholm, Amsterdam, Rotterdam, London, Oslo, Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania, Cortland, New York, Oakmont, Pennsylvania, El Paso, Texas, San Antonio, Texas, Edmonton, Alberta, Vancouver, British Columbia, and Denver, Colorado. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for those tickets.